Okay, welcome back everybody. So next big idea to introduce to you is the idea of a variable. A variable. So a variable for computers is like a storage location where you can store some data. Not quite like a variable that you think of for algebra or math. It's not quite like that. It's a storage location for data. And we can give it a name to make it more convenient to refer to that data. So say like you have a game and you want to keep track of score. That would be a great use of a variable. You have a variable called score that keeps track of your score. Okay, so how do we set up variables and how do we use variables in Snap? Okay, so here I have a sprite. I changed the look of the sprite to a button just for the niceness of the program. So let's say I want to make a program real simple, not really a game, but just as a demo. So what I want to happen is every time I click the sprite, so every time I move my mouse pointer over it and click it, it should add 1 to my score. Okay, so it's not really a fun game in the sense that you would play it, but just as a demo of a variable. So every time I click the button, I want my score to increase by 1. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we probably need a variable called score to store the score, to keep track of it. So here's how we're going to set that up. So you notice um, on our set of blocks here on the left, the very last section is called variables. So these are kind of like these dark orange blocks. So what we're going to do is first we're going to create a variable. We're going to create a storage location where we can store some data. So to do that, you notice at the very top you see a gray kind of rectangular button that says make a variable. So I'm going to click on that. That brings up this pop-up and we can name it whatever we want. So instead of just using like 5437, the storage location in memory, we can actually give it a name or a label to make it easier to remember what it does and what it's storing. Okay, so I'm going to call this one score. Okay, now these two buttons right here, you just generally just leave it as it is. Kind of the default is for all sprites. So you just kind of leave it like that. There are some instances where you might want to change it, but for now we'll just leave it with the default. And we click OK. Okay, so you see what happens is it created some stuff here in this variable. So it created, see this kind of uh, ovalish block that has our variable name on it. So that's whenever we want to use that variable, that data in our program. Now also notice in the stage area, it put a little display where we can see the value, the data that's stored in our variable. So right now kind of the default is 0. Now we can put whatever data we want there. We can put a number, we can put some text, we can put whatever data we want, but for now it's kind of just given initially a default of 0. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to write a program so that whenever I click this green button, it's going to increase my score by 1. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's go back to our scripts. So I'm going to start off by our standard when the green flag is clicked control block. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, whenever I click the green flag, that means I'm going to start my game. So at that point, I want to reset the score to 0. Otherwise, what might happen is if we play a game and then we start a new game, the old score might carry over. So I'm going to just reset the score to 0. Okay, so what I want to do is whatever value the score variable has, I'm going to just reset it to 0. So how do I do that? Okay, well, I'm going to go back to my variables section. You notice there's a block here that says set. Okay, so I'm going to drag this guy out and put it right under the green flag block. Now notice there's a drop down there. If I click on that drop down arrow, it's going to list all the variables that I've set up in my program so far. And so far there's only one called score. Okay, so now I can set the score to 0. It's already given a default of 0. If I wanted to set it to something else, I could put some other data there. Okay, but for now, let's just leave it as 0. So whenever I click the green flag to start a new game, I'm going to reset the score to 0 so old scores don't carry over. Okay, so these orange blocks here in this variable section, these dark orange blocks are what we use whenever we want to manipulate the data in our variable. Okay, now let's think about our algorithm. So what I want to happen is whenever I click this green button, I want my score to increase by 1. Okay, so well, we need something that's going to keep track of, that's going to sense whenever I click the green button. Okay, so that's usually, if I go to the control section, those are where those types of blocks are. When I want to sense something happening, I usually go to the orange control, light orange control section. Okay, so you notice right under the green flag block, there's this guy right here when the space bar is pressed. So if you want to have something happen when you press a key on the keyboard, you can use that. And then below that, notice there's this block that says when I am clicked. Okay, so this one is a block that will sense when that green button or that sprite is clicked. Okay, now you can kind of check it out. There's several other types of events or things happening that you can sense, but for now, let's just leave it as clicked. Okay, so when I click on that green button sprite, what I want to happen is I want the score variable to increase by 1. So I keep track of my score. Okay, so how do I increase the score by 1? Okay, well, let's go back and look at the variable section and see if there's something there that could help. So I look at all the different blocks. Set, no, not really. Change. Okay, so this one looks kind of promising. So it looks like I can change a value by a certain amount. So in this drop down, I'll check what's available. Score. Okay, so usually that will list all the different variables that you've got set up. So in this case, I have score. Okay, so if I drag that in, change score by, now it's kind of default is 1, and which is what we want. Every time we click it, we want it just to go up by 1, but if you wanted to go by 2s or whatever, you could change that. But for now, let's just leave it as 1. Okay, so what happens is, so two things are going to happen. So when I click the green flag to start the game, it's going to reset the score to 0, and then it's going to keep waiting for the green button to be clicked, and whenever I click it, it's going to increase the score by 1. Okay, so how do we know it's doing what we want it to? Well, notice it has that display, it displays the score in my stage area, so I can kind of watch what happens to the score as I click the green button. Okay, so let's try it out. So let's start the game. Okay, the score should just reset to 0. And then let me just start clicking the green button. Okay, so notice as I click the green button, notice how the score goes up. So I click it again, click, click, click. Okay, see how it keeps going up by 1. Okay, so it's kind of doing what I want it to. It's sensing that click, and then every time it changes that score variable by 1, and we can see the result in the stage. Okay, now if I watch what happens if I click the green flag, so I say I want to start a new game, I click the green flag again and watch the score, see how it resets to 0, and that's this guy taking over here. Okay, now if you want to really see what's being executed, remember we can go to our stepper, so we can click the stepper, and let me just change the speed a little bit slower so we can kind of see it a little bit slower. And let me run my program. So watch what happens. Okay, so when I click the green flag, notice this set of blocks got executed. So now nothing's happening right now because it's just waiting for me to do something. So let me click the button. When I click the button, see how this guy is activated. It increases the score. Click, click. Okay, so see every time I click, that set of blocks is activated. Okay, so variables. So real useful concept in programming. Every language you're going to ever learn has variables. And variables are nothing more than just locations in memory where you can store data and store and manipulate and keep track of and recall data. So you can remember scores, you can remember what people input, you can remember choices, real useful stuff. Okay, so variables, next concept.